Hello, everyone. This is Chris Connolly with the HarperCollins Library Marketing Team, and I am thrilled to be joined not only by my wonderful colleagues, Virginia and Lainey, who you can see there, but two beloved, praised authors. We have S.A. Chakraborty and Janie Chang, who are here to talk about the third book in each of their trilogies, which is really exciting. So we'll be starting with Janie, whose new book, The Library of Legends, is on sale now, went on sale May 12th. So congrats on that, Janie. And this is, again, the third book in a loosely connected trilogy following Three Souls and Dragon Springs Road. And I have to let you know, Janie, I absolutely lost myself in Dragon Springs Road. It really opened me up to your work. So I'm really excited to have you on. And again, this takes place in China, in this case, 1937 China, and follows a young woman who's traveling across China with a convoy of student refugees and fleeing the hostilities of a brutal war with Japan. There is the jacket. Elaine, I don't know if you have the jackets for the previous two novels as well. Well, beautiful. I just love these jackets. Just unforgettable historical novels with also implementation of Chinese history and lore and mythology. They're really beautiful works. So we'll be hearing from Janie first, and then we'll be following up with, again, S.A. Chakraborty talking about The Empire of Gold, which is the third book in the Daevabad trilogy, following the City of Brass and the Kingdom of Copper. So this is a stunning end to that trilogy, beloved by librarians everywhere. So we're really thrilled to follow this Egypt set fantasy trilogy, epic fantasy trilogy that makes it just, people are crazy for these books and they're unforgettable characters, and you left people hanging on the last book. People were really excited to hear and see what happened. So the time has come. And this book is going on sale June 30th, so the wait is almost over. So we're really excited. So before we start with our presentations, anything we want to say before we dive in? No? Ready to get to the goods? Okay. So we're going to put Shannon in the green room, and then we'll start with Janie, and then we'll bring Shannon back. So again, thank you both for joining us today. And Janie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be talking to librarians because as an author, librarians, they're my heroes and did so much for me when I was a little girl growing up, learning to love to read. Who thought I would end up writing a book? 3 books. So I'm going to talk for maybe 12 minutes or so, and I'll talk about the Library of Legends first, and then quite a bit about the history that inspired this book. So the Library of Legends is set in 1937 China, when war breaks out between China and Japan. And my main character, Lian, must follow her university when the war cuts her off from her mother, and the campus must evacuate to the interior of China. And the students, professors, and staff begin their 1,000-mile journey to safety, carrying their belongings and school supplies, even kitchenware. And most importantly, they carry with them the Library of Legends, which is a priceless ancient collection of Chinese myths. And as for Lian, who's always been cautious about opening up her feelings, the shared hardships on the road sort of bonds the students together, and she finds new friendships and possibly romance with a senior student named Xiao. But her family secrets also make her a victim of political manipulation, and she's forced to turn away from her friends, especially after one classmate is murdered and another one arrested. So after this, Lian decides to escape and make her way to Shanghai, hoping she can help her classmate there and also find her mother. And Xiao, her love interest and his loyal companion, the mysterious maidservant known as Sparrow, both insist on accompanying her. On this journey back, Lian learns of the connection between her companions and a story in the Library of Legends called The Willow Star and the Prince. But there are broader consequences too. It turns out that the mythical creatures described in the library are also on the move. And as the ancient books travel across the country, China's guardian spirits are on an evacuation of their own, one that will change the country forever. So I'm going to start by talking about the three things readers always ask about. And because it's historical fiction, they always want to know which part of this is real. And I'm going to give you fair warning that I'm kind of a history nerd if you haven't figured this out yet. So you're going to be hearing a lot about the history that inspired this book. So the questions I always get are, was there really a university that walked 1,000 miles to safety? Was there really a library of legends? Was there really a myth of the Willow Star and the Prince? Was there really such a university? Yes, and in fact, there were 77 Chinese universities that fled to safety. These were the ones whose campuses were in the eastern provinces of China, which were at the front lines of the war. So they traveled west, away from the war, into the relative safety of central China. Now, at this time, China had a population of about 500 million, but educated young adults were rare. There were literally only about 43,000 university students, and the Chinese government was desperate to protect them because this was the next generation they were counting on to rebuild China after the war. It was an absolutely unique exodus, the largest academic migration in history, but it's a story virtually unknown outside China. So I had to write about it. The government arranged for the students to have accommodations and transportation whenever possible, and money for food, but it was still pretty tough because China was a poor country and its resources were being spent on the war effort, and the refugee students shared the road with other refugees. Chris, maybe here you could put up the picture of the girl with the shoulder pole. That would be really fun. On my website, there are image galleries that help readers and book clubs visualize the world of the novels. And in the Library of Legends, I describe refugees carrying their worldly goods on their backs in wheelbarrows, carts, and on shoulder poles or carrying poles. They even carried their children. So here's a picture of a little girl balancing a shoulder pole, carrying an even smaller child in one of the baskets. And that was how some of the refugees carried their possessions as they, traveled to safety. And actually all over Asia, even today, in rural areas, this is still a common way to carry goods. Okay. If there was any one thing that convinced me the story had to be written, it was a scene from the memoirs of a former refugee student. And she wrote about a teacher who walked in front of his students with a small blackboard hanging down his back with the day's lessons written on it. And for me, this was just so moving and so emblematic of the Chinese reverence for education. I mean, it just sent chills down my spine. And I did write this scene into my novel. As a friend of mine said, keeping her school-age children on top of their homework during a lockdown hasn't been easy, but at least she wasn't trying to walk them through a war zone at the same time. So I really wanted to bring this chapter to light because for me, it's more than just history. It's family history. Because I learned of this time from my father and uncle who were students during the war, and they literally walked 1,000 miles to the interior of China, months and months and months, with their classmates. They slept on temple floors if nowhere else had enough room for them. They walked at night to avoid aerial attacks, and their professors continued on with classes whenever it was safe to stop for a few days or a few weeks. So thanks to family history, quite a few incidents in the novel are drawn from the stories I heard from my parents, from their friends, and friends of the family who were young adults during the Second World War. And I'm going to tell you, truth really is stranger than fiction. There are scenes in the novel that make you say, that's impossible, no one would do that, but they're true. As an author, I wouldn't dare make up some of the things in that book because people would never believe me. And when you get to the part about a little girl named Duckling you'll understand what I mean. Sorry, I have to let my cat in. Okay.
We're going to have multiple cat appearances on this episode, I assure viewers, so stay tuned.
Sorry,
It's a new feature of Door to Door, so.
If I don't, she's going to start howling. So, but anyway, she's out now, and she gets very indignant when I'm on Zoom, so she'll stay away. Okay, the second question. Was there really a library of legends? Short answer, no, there is not an ancient collection of myths and legends called the Library of Legends. However, the library in the novel is based upon a real 18th century encyclopedia commissioned by one of the Chinese emperors. And in English, the title would be called The Complete Library of Four Branches of Literature. So back in the 18th century, the Emperor Qianlong wanted to prove that the Qing dynasty, which his ancestors established, was as learned and as cultured as the Ming dynasty that came before. So he ordered his scholars to work on an encyclopedia that compiled all of the significant literature in China going back to the Han Dynasty, which is the 2nd century BC. An entire government department was created to manage this project. You know, they curated, they categorized, and then they hand copied this encyclopedia, which took more than 10 years to complete. And the result was a set of books, 36,400 volumes, 800 million words, and it would take another 225 years before another encyclopedia surpassed this word count. And that was the English Wikipedia in 2000 as it approached 1 billion words. So 800,000 words, and they made 7 hand-copied sets, if you can imagine, of the encyclopedia. And 7 imperial libraries were built in 7 different cities, especially to house each copy of the encyclopedia. So Chris, perhaps now you could pull up the picture of one of those imperial libraries. I think maybe only 3 of them are still standing, but this one is definitely still standing in the city of Hangzhou, and it's now a museum. And the true history of this encyclopedia is worth its own book, but I did write an article for Time Magazine about it, and Chris can also share that link with you. Okay, so how did this library become such a big part of a novel about university students fleeing war? Because the Library of Legends and its travels with the university is based on true events. I stumbled across memoirs by the alumni of one of those refugee universities. And this university took on the responsibility of bringing one of the last surviving copies of those encyclopedias with them, the one from that library building that you just saw. And as an author and as a book lover, just the idea that there were people willing to risk so much to save a legacy of books, a library treasure, was so inspiring. And I did some further research. And what happened was the chief librarian of the provincial library asked that university to carry the books to safety with them because he feared the books would be destroyed by war or stolen by the enemy, since it was one of the great library treasures of China. The chief librarian couldn't get funds from the government to pay for transporting the library, so he kept borrowing from friends and family, and he kept sending money to the university to move all that extra cargo, because it amounted to 230 crates of books that the university had to get onto boats and trains and trucks whenever possible, and if not, to pay laborers to load them into carts and wheelbarrows and push them along. Not once did the students and instructors ever consider ditching the books, even though it slowed them down, which put them at greater risk, because I mean they were being bombarded by aerial attacks all the time. And by the end of the war, the chief librarian had actually sold his own home to pay for moving the library. So if you love books, how could this not tug at your heart? And I took the liberty of fictionalizing the library, the encyclopedia, as a collection of myths and legends. And also as an author, this was like a gold mine because the library is such a powerful symbol of cultural heritage and knowledge of belief systems and traditions. It could carry such a wide range of metaphors. And for me, it represents those intangible assets that define a people. What are we fighting a war for, if not to save that legacy? Okay, so third question. Is there really a story of the Willow Star and the Prince? Well, no, but again, it was inspired by a famous Chinese folktale, and it does follow mythological traditions of romances between gods and mortals from many, many cultures. We all know them, you know, in Greek and Roman mythology, we have those. So the Willow Star and the Prince comes from the Chinese folktale of the cowherd and the celestial weaving maid. So Chris, you could share that last image. And as the story goes, the weaving maid comes down to earth to take a look around. She meets the handsome cowherd. They fall in love, but she's forced to return to heaven, where she cries so hard that the Queen Mother of Heaven takes pity, gives in, and allows her to meet her lover once a year, when all the birds of the earth fly up and form a bridge to the heavens. And so the two lovers can walk across the bridge of birds and meet once a year. And this has since been repackaged, thanks to all the marketing people. It's been repackaged into the Chinese version of Valentine's Day. So I've always loved fantasy, and somehow every time I try to write a straight historical novel, the supernatural keeps poking its way in. And I think it's because my father told me so many stories about our ancestors. My dad's family has a recorded genealogy of 36 generations. So I grew up hearing about my 7 times great-grandfather who saw a dragon and who spoke to immortals and who finally walked through a doorway and entered the world of immortals. So Chris, you may remember that from Dragon Springs Road, a portal into that other world. And I had another ancestor who saw a ghost dancing on the roof of a house, which foretold a death in that house, and so on. So yeah, I try to write straight historical fiction, but somehow it just doesn't work out. One of the surprising responses I've had from readers is how much they relate to this story of people coping with the realities of a world where nothing is certain anymore. And I began writing this novel more than 2 years ago, and I had no idea the book would release during a time when we'd all be self-isolating, having to stay away from our loved ones except through digital means. And I'm glad that this resonates, you know. The university in the novel, you know, the theme is that it's more than a group of buildings on the campus. The real university is in its knowledge and its culture. It's embodied by the faculty, staff, and students. And likewise, our communities and our identities are not defined by the buildings where we work or the cafes where we meet our friends. So I said I wasn't going to read, but I am going to read something. I want to read a poem from the front of the book because I've had many emails telling me how much it spoke to them. And the poet is Du Fu, one of the greatest poets of the Tang Dynasty from the 8th century, and yet it still resonates with us today. Though the country is broken, hills and streams endure. And in the city, spring comes again to trees and grasses. But flowers shed fearful tears, and desolate birds sing the sorrows of parting. Beacon fires have burned for 3 months now, and letters from home are worth 10,000 pieces of gold. Thank you.
That was a perfect way to end that presentation, Janie, and I do appreciate you joining us and telling readers about this book. Again, the Library of Legends is on sale now, and I highly recommend you read it. Again, readers can start with this book, or you can read Three Souls and Dragon Springs and then read this. but anywhere you dive in, you're sure to, again, just be enveloped with the history and the mythology and the characters, because that is ultimately what really draws you on, unforgettable characters that you really care about. And just a lot of love and appreciation on Facebook, Janie, for you coming on. Betty Taylor, a friend of ours, says, I loved the Library of Legends. It was beautiful. The cover is gorgeous. Just, again, a lot of appreciation. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. So again, everyone, you can get a copy. We posted a link for both Janie's Time article. I will post your website as well, because there's so many fantastic resources about your books that you can really get lost in on your website, and then a link for the book itself. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, Janie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Janie. Thanks so much. That was wonderful.
Bye, Janie.
Bye.
Well, that was a great presentation. My goodness.
I feel like I was in it's like a history course in history. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and that poem was again timeless, like she said. I thought that was really something. So, and I do think it's just a great book for our time, especially just with, again, I think with Chinese relations, and there's such a rich history there, and I think readers need that. They can get lost, they can learn, and they can empathize. So it's really something. So highly recommend viewers check out that trilogy. It's something. So anything else before we bring on our next esteemed guest?
I'm gonna miss Janie's cat.
I know, barely got to see
pretty funny.
her. That is.
But perhaps Shannon has a little show and tell besides her book talk. We'll have to see.
Yeah, let's bring her on and see what the cat's doing.
We had a long conversation about various pets and little people, little children.
Hi, Shannon. How are you? Welcome
How are
back.
Thank you. I'm just enjoying the poem and the tropical theme going on yours. I'm like, this is nice.
Yeah, this virtual thing's not so bad. I don't know if you caught Janie's cat made a brief appearance, so
Yes.
the stakes have been raised. So viewers, we met Shannon's cat earlier. Hopefully she comes back. And
They are very
Paul
asleep
wave.
right now in their cat tower. They're good. One eye is open, looking at me upside down, but I think we're okay.
Okay, we're safe. Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and congrats on completing your trilogy, which is incredible. And your latest is a library reads pick. So it's vetted by public librarians everywhere. They voted, they shouted, they let people know this is a book you need to read. And boy, is it ever. Star reviews from Library Journal and Book Lists, just raves across the board. Library Journal says Chakraborty brings her epic fantasy series to a stunning conclusion. Rich details, familial ties, and magical politics sing in this lush world built from Middle Eastern history and imagination. No small words there. So do you want to give viewers an introduction to the book and the trilogy at large? You don't mind, Shannon?
Of course. So the Daevabad trilogy is a historical epic fantasy that takes place in the 18th century, and it opens up in Cairo under Napoleon's reign, but it very swiftly moves into a magical alternative world. And it largely centers on the adventures of a con artist turned royal physician to magical creatures named Nahri. And it's a book that I started writing actually, not meant as a book. It was something I sort of wrote in my spare time because I wanted to go back to graduate school for history, and I was working during the recession, and I started setting these stories in essentially a magical alternative world inspired by the medieval Islamic world. And I would envision things like, okay, I was listening to what Janie was saying about, librarians taking their knowledge, because in the world of Daevabad, I had envisioned the Jinn taking much of their world as inspired by the human world, and that there would be this entire class of magical creatures which would travel all the libraries of the human world and bring back copies of their treasures. But getting back to the actual book, I get distracted when I start talking about historical libraries. But getting back to the actual book, in the story, Nahri, who's my main character, essentially finds out the magical world she's always sort of dismissed as a myth, as nonsense, is very much real, that she's heir to it, and her presence is going to provoke major reckoning and civil war within its society. And I don't want to spoil things too much. Even before this event, I was like, what can I say about the Empire of Gold that doesn't ruin things? And the answer is very little. And I will take my giant book here, but it does wrap up. It's this big. It wraps up Ali, who is the Jinn Prince's and Nahri's adventures, not just in Daevabad, which is the magical city of Jinn, but we see some other realms and places as well. And since I was talking a bit about the world building and sort of these magical Jinn, I did want to read a section from the City of Brass about the libraries. And I will just start by saying I always enjoy speaking to librarians, because I was totally one of those kids who you would see coming into your branches and walking out with just a backpack full of many books as I could cram. I wrote the Daevabad Trilogy in my local library. I would go there in the morning when my daughter was just a baby and do the mommy and me activities, and then come back in the afternoon and just try to hammer out some pages. So I always try to include small excerpts about libraries in the City of Brass and in the Kingdom of Copper and in Empire of Gold. We'll see a new one. So I did want to just share a small bit. It's a lock. A lock? No, it cannot be. Look at it. It's obviously some advanced mechanism, a scientific tool, or, considering the fish, perhaps a navigational aid for the sea. It's a lock. Nahri took the metal object from Alizade's hands. It was made of iron and shaped like an ornate fish with fluttering fins and a curved tail, and it had a series of boxy pictograms carved into one side. She pulled free a pin from her headscarf and turned the lock over to find the keyhole. Holding it close to her ear, go away, cat, go away. She expertly picked it, and the bar swung open. See? A lock. It's just missing its key. Nahri triumphantly handed the ornamental lock back to Ali and leaned into her cushion, propping her feet up on a plump silk ottoman. She and her overqualified tutor were in one of the upper balconies of the Royal Library, the same place they'd been meeting every afternoon for the past few weeks. She took a sip of tea, admiring the intricate glasswork of the nearby window. The impressive library had quickly become her favorite place in the palace. Even bigger than Ghassan's throne room, the huge roofed-over courtyard was filled with bustling scholars and arguing students. On the balcony across from them, a Saharan instructor had conjured up smoke into an even larger map than the one Dara had made for her during their desert crossing. A miniature boat of spun glass floated in its sea. The instructor raised his hands, and a gust of wind filled its silken sails, sending it racing along a chart marked by tiny burning embers as several students watched. In the alcove above him, an Agnivanshi scholar was teaching mathematics. With each snap of her fingers, a new number appeared scorched on the whitewashed wall before her, a veritable map of equations her pupils were diligently copying. Then there were the books themselves. The shelves soared out of sight to meet the dizzyingly high ceiling. Ali, who had seemed utterly delighted by her interest in the library, had told her that its vast inventory contained copies of just about every work ever written, both Jinn and human. Apparently, there was an entire class of Jinn who spent their lives traveling from human library to human library, meticulously copying its works and sending them back to be archived in Daevabad. The shelves were also crowded with glittering tools and instruments, murky preservation jars, and dusty artifacts. Ali warned her away from the majority. Apparently, small explosions were not uncommon. The Jinn had a propensity for exploring the properties of fire in every form. And that's just a small bit I wanted to share of the world. With the Daevabad Trilogy, I explored large themes about family and religion and duty and sort of this pull of justice, and recreated some truly magical and epic moments about creatures from folklore and things that would make your head spin. But I also think fantasy is very important when it has those smaller moments, when you can just imagine yourself in a world that is fantastical, but enough that you can be there and sit there and kind of embrace it. And I always liked having these little sort of Easter eggs in about what it might have been to just be a normal citizen of Daevabad and go to a library such as this.
I think that's so brilliant, and you're right. It really does immerse the reader and kind of it shows this world that kind of lives beyond the page almost. It just makes it really believable. And speaking of this world that you've made, so obviously fantasy traditionally is dominated by Western imagery, mythology, and whatnot. Were you a fantasy reader growing up? Is this something you've been like kind of thinking about for a while, as far as more injecting, Middle Eastern mythology into a fantasy story?
No, not really. I always feel a little treasonous saying this, but I was actually more of a science fiction fan growing up. And I came to fantasy a little late, and I actually came to fantasy more after history and folklore, which I thought was fascinating in different ways. And it's interesting because the genre itself, it's very much, we say like Mary Shelley and Tolkien are the originators of our entire genre. And I always found that strange coming from a slightly different field and perspective, because human beings have always told stories about the fantastical. In fact, I think many of the stories people told in the medieval era were far more inventive than anything I could come up with. So I very much enjoy telling these stories and retelling tales and thinking about something, because it feels like taking my place in a very long history and line of people who have spun magic to entertain others, to teach lessons, to sort of just make the world a bit more fantastical.
Excellent. And with the story, so now you have the trilogy wrapped up. Looking back from where you started, did you have a clear vision for where you would be in book 3? Like, how did you set this up?
I will call it a murky vision, because I thought I had a fairly clear vision at this point 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really interesting. The David Bond trilogy was the first book I ever wrote. City Brass was the first book I ever wrote. I really didn't have any background in creative writing, and writing the trilogy was sort of its own journey and exercise in what it was to be a writer for me. And ironically enough, because I'm very much I plot everything in my life and I have 1,000 different to-do lists, I wanted to find and write a character-driven story. So while I was working on the books, I tried to kind of let myself go from outlines or ideas of what I thought it had to be towards the end, and really just follow where the story and the characters felt like they were going. And even I'm sure people who have read it would probably disagree with me, but The Empire of Gold is a far more hopeful book than I had envisioned it would be originally. I think writing in this day and age, I didn't want people to feel crushed. I wanted to give a slight mirror to what we probably all feel like, of how do you live in a society that is unjust, and it doesn't seem like there's any clear path towards fixing things or making things better. You still fight even when you don't see a victory. And I wanted to write a book that embraced that ethos, and that we see these characters who are flawed but learn and grow, and that where it ends is just the beginning of another story, and it's hopeful, and it tears apart a lot of the tropes we see in fantasy in terms of the rightful heir and redemption and some of these things, and I hope leaves people feeling a bit more open and bright than if I had just sort of murdered everybody.
Speaking of murdering everyone, so I think of like George R.R. Martin and some of his like food scenes and his banquet scenes, and this is something we were talking to your editor about. So you are a big foodie, and food is part of the books and part of your life. How did you resist the urge to write like giant banquet scenes? Like what do you decide to put in and put out? And is that kind of a more conversation you have with your editor? Or are you doing that a lot as you're writing?
I'm just impressed you think I resisted, because I reread my books and I'm like, people are eating in every chapter and all of the food is described. So I did include it because I also, again, it's the idea of world building and sort of creating an alternate world for your reader, and food is a huge part of that. So I wanted to show that. So I definitely included a lot of it, and I had such fun just looking up old historical recipes and envisioning how they could be changed with magic. In Kingdom of Copper, I wrote chapter which continues to be my favorite, and it's a banquet scene, and it's essentially a culinary competition. And I modeled it after earlier competitions from both Abbasid Baghdad and pre-Islamic Persia, that it was sort of, you were not a fancy nobleman if you didn't have an extremely excellent kitchen and cook, and there would be competitions. It was sort of like Iron Chef, the earlier tradition. And I always knew, I'm looking in historical texts, I was like, I need to include that. There has to be a culinary contest. So I wrote it, and I was able to just kind of infuse other aspects of magic in it. There's this recipe I remember looking for, fish drowned in wine, which is really grim. But I sort of I was like, okay, going with that, like, what if we had something else, like eels or something, and they're in this vinegary syrup, and I talked about, like, how they were found in the deepest caves. So it's just like, it's ways to liven things up a bit, and just think, well, not that was not a good recipe. But I did definitely want to have readers, sort of have their mouths watering as they read a lot of the other aspects.
No, a Daevabad cookbook? Could it be?
Maybe. I did
Yeah.
include some extra recipes in the Kingdom of Copper paperback. I had some historical recipes.
Oh, very cool. And that is available. So everyone, if you're hungry for fish drowned in wine or anything else, go grab that. And so speaking of research and history and what you're pulling from, your depth of knowledge and what you're finding in scripts and whatnot, what happens when you run up against something that maybe doesn't align with your story? How do you make those decisions about what to include and what to maybe sidestep or alter a little bit?
Well, it's funny that you say this, ask me this, because the Daevabad trilogy is very, very loosely inspired by history, and more aspects of it, of the Jinn are stealing things and mirroring their own world, so you would kind of expect them to get it wrong. So I didn't really run into that problem. But my next trilogy is proper historical fantasy. And even now, I've been a bit lost in the weeds with the research, because there's almost too much good stuff. I had this story I was going to set in sort of the later part of the 13th century. And then I started reading about some of the kings and queens of the era. And there's one who she is just fascinating. And she died like decades before my book was supposed to take place. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, nobody's gonna know. Like, can I do, what's 50 years between friends? So
yeah, of course. It's
we'll
only
see.
friends
I might have
watching
a
here
answer
too,
for that
so don't
question
worry.
in a bit.
Well, that's super exciting. I'm sure viewers are now, their ears perked up if they weren't already, about another trilogy, but you'll all have to wait. First, go check out The Empire of Gold. So I guess just one more thing, because again, characters they're beloved, they stick with you. Could you talk about the characters and kind of who you might connect with the most? Were any of them particularly challenging to write, especially characters that maybe you don't like very much?
I mean, I like all of them. I think people will often ask me, like, oh, you must not like so-and-so because you put them through terrible ordeals. I was like, that's how you know I like them more. But they were all different, and they were all both challenging and enjoyable to write in different ways. My first thought immediately goes to Nahri, because I just wanted her to be just this very well-rounded, complicated female character that we don't always get to see. And I wanted her to feel strong but fragile and human. That, what is it like to be crushed and rise again over and over and over again? It was very important that I let her be ambitious, that I let her be messy. So a lot of that I tried to pull from some of my own experiences, especially with Empire of Gold, when she's kind of dealing with just being hopeless and going back and fighting again, even though she feels hopeless, and what it's like to pull yourself together again. With Ali, I loved writing him because he was sort of my stand-in for, as devout Muslim characters, and I'm a practicing Muslim myself, and it was very important for me to sort of have a character like that and have him go through some of the I guess ordeals and issues that I've been through, and just have some, have him be human and proud of his faith and inspired and feel real in a way that sometimes I feel like, Muslim characters, we're given a very certain type of representation in media, and it does not resonate. challenging would be, in terms of my point of view characters, Darrow was the most challenging to write. And originally I wasn't actually going to write his perspective because I thought, he's essentially the most powerful character in the story, and yet he's treated as a pawn and as a weapon. And I thought there was sort of richness to be found in denying him a voice. At least I thought that, until my agent and my editor were like, no, there's not. You've created a fascinating character, get into his head. And once I was in his head, I just felt like writing him took the sort of the themes of the novel and my own experience and abilities as a writer so much farther, because I really wanted to write a character who I knew would be beloved. And I think in many ways, is the archetypal hero and love interest and dashing, brooding man who you root for, but who has truly committed awful acts. And I wanted to see if I could find the tightrope of showing him as a person and also not excusing the things that he's done. Because I don't think many villains in history think of themselves as a villain. They justify it to themselves. People can justify awful things to themselves. It's sort of the idea of, when the chips are down, everyone thinks they're going to be a hero and do the right thing. A lot of people don't do the right thing, and they don't necessarily understand it at the time. So I wanted to really delve into that mindset and see how that would work, and if there were still ways to find a glimmer of goodness. So I will say I enjoyed writing them all, and they each presented their own challenge and their own enjoyment. And I like where I got them in the end. That was very important for me to do, that they all felt like they got a good, deserving end that felt justified. And I think I got there.
You did. And
Thank you.
speaking of endings, it's funny because, you've worked so long in this trilogy, and now it's out in the world, and it kind of takes a life of its own at that point, and fans lose themselves and adore this world that you've created. And it really does live on once it's off your desk and into the world. Could you talk about kind of the experience of now sharing this world with readers? And you shared some fan art with us, which I thought was really cool, and kind of what that experience is like.
It's just been incredible. I mean, people always ask me this question. I'm like, I don't know. I'm a writer, and there's only so many words I can come up with. This is really cool. I mean, like I said, I was a science fiction fan. I've been in fandom spaces since I was a pre-teen. To see fan art, and I know that there's fan fiction out there, it's humbling. I mean, it's incredible. I feel incredibly honored that people would read aspects of my world and envision them in their own creative way, whether that be with stories or art. I mean, it is just an incredible experience. I love it. I completely go for it. It's amazing. That's, to me, my readers and my fans really built the series up, and it's theirs now in a way. The books are done. I have my canon. I have what I put out there, but I think it lives on in what readers do with it, and I'm just honored.
Chris, can you show that art again? That's just
Sure.
really beautiful.
Yeah, so this was, I forgot to explain, there were two fans who did pieces of the library scene that I wrote of Alia Nahri. And the one that you had just shown is by Leafy Jade over on Instagram. And there was another one by Joni that was sort of a line drawing of them.
Let's see. Oh, here, I'll go ahead and share the line drawing because it's really good too. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, and they are so happy. Which is nice. And there's
in
food.
5 minutes, they're happy.
I think I remember this moment. All right, excellent. Well, again, I want to thank you for joining us today. I think you're an author that, again, has just so resonated, of course, with the book buying public, but with libraries and our market, and just people are so appreciative for you coming on and talking about the book. I just want to read a few quick comments. Janet Lockhart, our good friend and librarian, said, "I loved this trilogy. I was sad to turn the last page of Empire of Gold because I will miss the world and the characters so much." I think that says it well. Laurel Bliss says, "Same here, Janet. I read an e-galley of Empire of Gold last week and loved it. The trilogy has wonderful characters and a great setting." So there you have it.
And
thank you so much.
Lainey has something to add.
Oh, yes.
Oh, well, before I ask this question, I want to remind everybody that you were so gracious to send us a clip for your announcement when you won the library read pick. So everybody can go and listen to that on our podcast, Library Love Fest podcast, and hear from you. We announced all of the winners for June. Congratulations again on that. And our friend Lillian Dabney wants to know what you're reading right now.
What I'm reading right now is right next to me. I'm reading Mexican Gothic, and I am loving it. I've loved her other books, and this was supposed to be my release week treat, and then it came a week early, and I lasted approximately 45 minutes in waiting, and I'm really enjoying it.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think that pretty much does it for our episode today. So before we wrap up, any last words? And do the cats have anything to say, Shannon, before we leave?
Nope, the cats are very unconscious. I can hear my daughter just arriving, so I'm just like, the door is going to open. But thank you so much for having me and for all of your great questions and kind words.
Of course. Well, again,
Thank you so much for joining. And God, I feel like we've come such a long way. Was it Library Journal's Day of Dialogue? Wasn't that it?
Yes, that was my first event that I ever did.
Yeah.
I was such a scared rookie.
Oh, you were so wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and continue to be.
Tomorrow, one last announcement. We have even more sci-fi fantasy love this week because we have a takeover coming. So don't forget to go to Instagram and follow us, Harper Library, and you'll see a takeover from James Murray and Darren Wearmouth for Obliteration tomorrow. So we're really excited about that. It's been a love fest of fantasy this week.
Yeah, it's been great. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon. It's great to see you again.
You too.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, well, I think that does it for our episode today. So should we say our goodbyes?
We don't have to. We could
Don't
stay
have to?
on, and then people will feel guilty if they log off. So we'll just stay
All
on.
right. It's kind of like a dance-a-thon, only it's a Zoom-a-thon or something
Right.
like that. Who's going to pass out first?
They shoe horses, don't they?
Anything.
Oh my goodness, she's amazing.
She is. Yeah, it's just weird. I remember her first Facebook Live interview she did with us too, which was
I know.
like Facebook Live was not a thing people really did. And now here we are,
That's right.
1,000 odd episodes later, and
Library Love
she's
Fest, cutting edge.
cutting edge indeed.
And she's so
Will be-
lovely.
She
She's
is.
in Queens. Now she moved.
She's not too far though.
Yeah.
Honorary Queens member forever,
Yeah.
right? Is that the-
And Janie Chang, how cool. What a great lesson. It's just wonderful to listen to both of them. So
Yeah.
fun.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I think we should say goodbye, and then just so everyone knows, next week we have Susan Wiggs joining us on Facebook Live.
Wigs!
So that's kind of a big deal.
At a special time. Don't forget.
Yeah, so it's gonna be 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's on Tuesday. I'm saying it really long. I just want to confirm that. Yes, that is
Scratch
right.
out that Tuesday till you know for sure.
Tuesday. It is Tuesday. Yeah, it is Tuesday. So join us Tuesday. That is next Tuesday, June 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the one and only Susan Wiggs, author of The Lost and Found Bookshop, another library reads pick. So
Yes. Very
long
exciting.
time library supporter. She's great,
That's
entertaining, and so
fabulous.
smart. So
Get excited
join us then.
on the podcast, just like for Empire of Gold. Susan submitted an audio, so you can get ready for next week.
Yes. It's
Excellent.
and then Thursday that's right before 4th of July. So we're not gonna be on because we're not.
Gonna be on the beach.
Fireworks.
Yeah, we're gonna go to Indiana and hang out with Chris on the beach.
Go.
But yes, Susan Wiggs, super fun. We have lots of cool things coming up on our door to door. And everyone, don't forget, mark your calendars now, July 9th, the world famous Book Buzz, the HarperCollins Adult Book Buzz will be taking place on July 9th.
On
in
Crowdcast.
Piscataway. I'm not kidding. I love to say Piscataway. I don't even know why.
It rolls off the tongue like silk.
Yes.
And I'm posting the link to our Crowdcast registration page. So anyone watching, just register there on the link that I am sharing with you now.
Oh, cup
And you'll get
dancing.
all the details. So
Yes.
we'll hopefully see you then.
We're going to talk about fall.
Yep, sorry.
Fall and winter 2021. Some highlights from early winter 2021.
Yes.
And,
what-
well, I won't say it. Surprise guest.
Oh,
Live. Don't say anything, you guys. Surprise. All right, what were you going to say, Lainey? I'm sorry.
surprise.
I was just going to say we're at ALA. We have a booth, so come visit our booth, and it's all virtual. We did a little taste buzz, a little bite-sized buzz to, whet your appetite for our July 9th. So go check it out, and we'll see you virtually on ALA's website.
Yeah, that's that happened today, but everything is archived, and I feel like we did that so long ago. But it's great, and if I do say so myself, no, it's just a little appetizer to the entree on July 9th. Also, Stacey Abrams, while not our author, she's amazing, and you guys got to go back and watch that interview with her and Tracy Hall. It's amazing. She's genius, which we knew, but it's so cool. She's great. She got great stories. Mom was a librarian. Oh, you gotta watch it. Anyway, virtual ALA. Check it out. Go to our booth. What's happening in the booth? Free booze. Not true.
It's BYOB.
It's BYOB. Good one. Good one, Lainey. All right. Well, it's 2:53, and I guess we'll say goodbye. Is anybody even watching us?
We have viewers still. And let's see, Janet Lockhart's doing her Book Buzz Boogie in celebration. I'd love to see it. Janet, send us a video. We'll share it.
Love Janet Lockhart.
Yeah,
Love her.
best. Lillian Dabney, our friend
Lillian
Lillian Dabney
Dabney.
just registered.
Love her.
So great. Jane Jorgensen said she just
Oh,
had
Jane
Stacey Abrams for our Wisconsin Book Fest. What?
Nice.
Jane,
Good for you.
phenomenal.
Good for you.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah,
That's cool, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good. It's all about the books.
All about the books.
All right. Well, everyone take good care of yourselves. Stay safe. Don't get tricked. Somebody said today on the news, because this unfortunately cases of COVID-19 are rising. And so somebody said, this isn't going away. So don't feed it. And people are acting, I thought this was very funny. Not funny. People are acting like they're cheated on a diet and they're surprised when they don't lose weight. That's how some people are acting when they're like, I don't know why I got this, because I was, doing whatever. Anyway, all of that is to say, please, everyone, just stay diligent and just wear a mask and just be careful, be safe. We love you all. We do. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Be safe.